Have you ever heard of the Communications Capabilities Development Program? Well, if it sounds like something out of George Orwell's novel 1984, you may be right. Big Brother is planning to watch over you. The program will allow the government vast new powers of surveillance on the internet and to snoop into our private lives. Hello and welcome to A Simple Question with me, Phil Rees. So should the government be allowed to store vast volumes of data on our emails, on our web browsing history, and even who our friends are on Facebook? Well, before we find out what the public thinks here on the streets of London, here's a quick video clip.
Over the past 30 years, considerable advances in technology have already dramatically increased the powers of the state to carry out surveillance upon its citizens. From CCTV cameras to fingerprinting to electronic tagging, microchip tracking and DNA databases. But for the UK government, that's not enough. The last Labour government drew up plans to store information about people's activities online as part of the Interception Modernisation programme. This was shelved in 2009 following widespread criticism from civil liberties groups as well as the current ruling coalition. Now the coalition government wants to revive the programme as a new initiative under the name of the Communications Capabilities Development Programme. The proposed new law will allow unprecedented levels of access to the entire population's phone records, emails, browsing history and activity on social networking sites. It would include chat messages sent within video games, direct messages on Twitter and private messages on Facebook. Mobile records would include the geographical location of where a call or text message was made, and web records would include a computer's IP address. What's more, this process would be allowed without any oversight from the courts. While the coalition government is calling the proposal a step towards a more modernized system of controlling data, it's being criticized as highly invasive. Only a few years ago, in 2008, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the UK government surveillance practices violate the privacy rights of UK and foreign citizens, in a case where the government acquired confidential information from civil society organisations through phone and internet tapping. So why is the government so eager to acquire even greater powers to track people's movements and retain personal data? Should the police and security services be allowed powers to snoop into our lives without needing the approval of an independent judge? And should such a system of surveillance, which has been favoured by Arab despots, be introduced into a society that is supposed to be democratic and fair?
A Simple Question is a show that finds out what the public thinks here on the streets of London. I began today by asking what people knew about government plans to introduce a mass surveillance system. And why does the government want to introduce it?
Well, I only know what has been on the news, and it does concern me that the government, could look into people's private emails, and of course they decide whether it's relevant or not, and not the individual. So generally, whilst concerned about security and all of that you read about, I'm pretty sceptical about the reasoning for the Snoopers Charter, as it has been referred to. So yeah, wouldn't put me down as being pro what the government is proposing, no.
What do you know about government plans to bring in a mass surveillance system?
I've heard stories that they're trying to bring one in.
I've not heard of such a programme.
Is it just that it's going to be introduced everywhere in public, so even in toilets, in restaurants, and literally, is it just everywhere so that we're constantly being monitored? Is that the idea?
What do you know about the government's plans to introduce a sort of mass internet surveillance system?
I know very little about them, to be honest with you, but I guess it's being done again just to keep an eye on public issues.
I probably guess I don't know anything more than maybe what I've read in some of the papers. I know that that's definitely going to be in place whether the public wants it or not. So,
why do you think the government wants to introduce this, which would allow them to be able to monitor all your emails, internet browsing and all that?
Control, mainly. That's what I think anyway, but I don't know about anybody else, but that's what I think, control.
Well, I would think they want to know what's going on, maybe for national security. could well be a reason.
I suppose to reduce crime, make sure it's safe for people to walk about. And I think generally, it's for good ideas rather than, to sort of be nosy and pry on people.
Why do you think the government need these new laws in?
Well, they need them because whether you're an organised criminal or a terrorist, technology is an excellent way of improving the efficiency of your organisation, as it is with any other business. So therefore, being in a position where you can find out what's been communicated and use it to either prevent or catch criminals or terrorists is actually quite important. But it's like most controls, if it's used properly, it's perfectly sensible. The issue is the potential for abuse, and we're reliant on as the phrase goes, who will guard the guardians.
They probably put forward some argument for security, etc. But I think probably at the end of it all, I think it's to do with business, it's to do with selling, it's to do know what people are wanting, what consumers want, everything. It's all to do with money at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, those are the views of the public here on the streets of London. Well, our experts today are Guy Herbert from No to ID, the campaigning group against a national identity register. And we have Nick Pickles from Big Brother Watch.
This is essentially a revival, completely unchanged, of a programme that was initially proposed back in about 2008. And I had discussions with people at the Home Office about it at that time, and they essentially pitching it in precisely the same terms, saying we need to maintain our capability to monitor communications and in order to defend the public against terrorism and serious crime and so forth. The narrative hasn't changed at all. The only thing that's happened in the intervening period is that we've had a change of government, and the very same people who were pushing it before have persuaded a new set of ministers to come on board. So it's not exactly the political arm of the government that wants this. It's a bureaucratic project. It's part of the, I suppose you'd call it the security establishment's wish list of things that they would like to be able to do. In almost every country there is licensing of telecommunications providers, and part of the telecoms licensing in almost every country is that you have to install your exchange equipment in such a way that it can be tapped by the authorities. And this is essentially an extension of that idea to internet service providers. So what we understand the programme to be is not just a compulsion to store quite a lot of data, but to provide gateways, black boxes, through which the intelligence services, specifically GCHQ, can directly interrogate that data. We don't know the details, of course. All we know is that the government has, and by that I mean essentially the Home Office, has been in discussions with the larger ISPs for several years now, trying to see what they will and will not put up with. So that's where we're at. There's a certain amount of speculation, but there's been a drip of information over the years from the security side, which makes it pretty clear that that's what they're about.
Around the world, Britain is often referred to as one of the most surveyed democracies of anywhere, and indeed the level of CCTV cameras we have in not just major cities but throughout the country, and also the way that the police have very wide-ranging powers to spy on people, and some local authorities even have these powers. That's led to a situation where people accept a degree of state intrusion. But the recent debate about our emails and phone calls being monitored has led a lot of people to ask that this is a step too far, and the government doesn't need these powers to see what its citizens are doing. Already there is some data retained if you use a mobile phone, for example, and your mobile phone company will say, this is who you called, this is when you called them, and this is how long the call is. The government thinks that because people now use the internet, that data isn't available, and so if information was passing across the internet, they're less likely to be able to catch people either before or after a crime's taken place. Our concern is that if this would be an unparalleled level of surveillance on people's private lives, and it's far from clear if it would actually improve public safety. One of the things the government has yet to do is to make clear why it does need these powers. We understand that the world's changing and the internet offers new communications routes, but there needs to be far more detail offered as to what the government wants to do, and demonstrating why they need so much information about people who have done nothing wrong and are not even under suspicion of doing something wrong. That's a big line to cross, and we've been arguing in a democratic society it is not for an innocent individual to justify why the government doesn't spy on them. There's two parts to the proposals. The first part is to ask companies to store an awful lot of data about their users. The second part is about giving the government access to the physical networks so they can install black boxes and in real time monitor what people are doing. This does ask the question if it's surveillance being outsourced, but equally it also highlights how the government probably couldn't do this on its own. So it's now having to nationalise the infrastructure of communications companies to provide its own surveillance capability.
Under the proposals, private companies are required to store phone records, emails and browsing history and so forth, and share it with the police whenever they request it. But is it ethical for private companies to be working so closely with the state when it's snooping on its citizens? Well, let's find out what the public thinks.
If they feel that there's a national issue, a national security issue, then they may feel they've got good justification, and however they source that information, if they believe they're acting in the people's interests, they may feel they have a case for that, whether people particularly like that or not.
One of the concerns is that a lot of this information will be stored by private companies. They're obliged to, or if the proposal goes ahead, they'll be obliged to store it on individuals. Now, do you think there will be enough safeguards, and do you think it's right that the onus is on private companies to store all this personal information on behalf of the state?
Well, the difficulty is that the larger the number of people involved, it's a bit like gossip, the more likelihood that it's going to leak out. I mean, there's no issues with security and encryption of data because those technologies are very well established. The issue is really whether or not information is fully safeguarded and that the government puts sufficient controls to stop people actually being able to commercially exploit it.
Probably not, because then you never know where your information is going to be sent to, and again, you know, you've got this issue about if your information is sent, how do you know it's sent securely, and you know, effectively it's open for abuse and never secure.
Private companies are being asked to store this information on you. Now, are you concerned that these private companies are sort of being asked to work alongside the police and may not have the safeguards in place to be able to guard all that information about you?
I think that's really worrying as well, that private companies are actually being asked to do this. And I'd like to know who these companies are and what are their credentials, and who's actually checking on them.
If of course the government has concerns over key individuals, I think they've got sufficient powers already to require companies to release emails, particularly sort of commercial email traffic. So I think they've got the powers already in place. I don't think they need any additional powers.
It would also allow the program to run without interference from the courts, all right? In the past, if you needed to do a wiretap, you had to get a court order. Do you think that, you know, this is a worrying development?
Yes, because if you accidentally go on a PC and, for example, you do something wrong, then the police can arrest you, and despite the fact you might be innocent, they didn't have a court order, and then you end up in court for something they didn't have a court order for, which is wrong.
Well, of course it is. If it's operating outside the rule of law, then it's deeply worrying.
This new program that's being proposed would no longer need court authorization in order to monitor citizens, because in the past, to get a wiretap, it had to go through the courts. Do you think there's a real danger that the police are getting too much power?
I don't know whether it's the police getting enough power, but somebody is.
Of course it would. I mean, someone's got to police it. Someone's got to, well, understand what's going on and be on the side of people instead of being kind of on the side of the government and the law, which seems to be normal now.
Different views there from the public here in the streets of London. So let's find out what our experts have to say.
What we've actually got with this new program is just an extension, making it much easier for the I suppose there are about 1,400 organisations which have the power to obtain communications data to get it. That means that more will be sought. By making something easier, you create, and it is worrying that it's completely without oversight. And what we at No2ID and other civil liberties organisations have been saying for a decade is that any kind of surveillance ought to require a warrant. At the moment it doesn't. It ought to go to a third party, to a magistrate or a judge, depending on the nature of the surveillance, and that the case for it to be done should be made. There needs to be a case to do it. What's very worrying about this scheme is that it is invested with a bit of the legend and a bit of the fantasy of security services, again, all over the world, that if only you collect enough data, you have enough data that you can get immediate access to, you can do phishing expeditions, you can plot networks of people and how they relate to one another, you can spot patterns before things happen. It's something of a fantasy, but it's quite a dangerous one. One of the reasons perhaps that Britain is so cavalier about these things is because we have very little history of political policing or of a police state. But nonetheless, it is dangerous, and we're out of step with some countries, but not with others. I mean, there are many countries with genuine secret polices who will who are completely beyond the bounds of law and order. But compared with, say, other Western European nations or North America, we have less control than most, but more than a few. The nature of the legal systems varies, but I think that we have changed very much over the past. The structure and the approach to the way these things are done has changed in the last 10, 20 years. And we are in danger of changing from our very much more judge-dependent, independently administered judicial system towards a system where the investigator and the prosecutor is king.
This has been a major problem in Britain now since the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act was passed. More than 3 million warrants have been authorised for information about people's activities and to authorise surveillance, and less than 1% of those were authorised by a judge. So there's a real question to be asked. What is the check and balance on these proposals when already we know, for example, Google refused more than a third of the requests it received from law enforcement because it felt there wasn't just grounds to hand over people's confidential data. If you don't have a court process and companies aren't able to resist the government's requests, then users' privacy is clearly at risk. The government and the authorities already have a huge range of powers that allow them to intercept your mail, listen to your phone calls, place hidden cameras and hidden microphones around your home. These powers already exist, so it's still far from clear why the government needs the kind of data retaining that they're talking about, when in effect it doesn't appear that it will make preventing a crime easier, but it may be useful after an event. And that's why we're worried that the powers we introduced for terrorism and serious incidents, but over the coming years we'll see them used for more trivial and low-level crimes, as has happened with other powers introduced purportedly to fight terrorism. I think there's a real risk if you look to countries like China, where they do monitor everything that their citizens do online, then the natural conclusion of first you monitor, then you control is a real risk, and the best way to make sure that the British citizens are able to exercise free speech and free association is that they should be able to communicate in private. These proposals do threaten that privacy. They threaten the whole concept of the internet as a free and democratic way of communicating, and that's why we will be campaigning against anything that undermines civil liberties online in such a draconian way.
In the past, surveillance such as phone tapping needed a court order. If the Communication Capabilities Development Program came into effect, there would be no need for court authorization. In fact, the police would be able to monitor citizens without independent oversight. Do such powers represent a move towards a police state? Well, let's find out what the public thinks.
I suspect it is, but I don't know. But I suspect it is. I suspect people are being watched. I'm not paranoid, but I just think it's the way things are going, and technology, cameras on every street corner, you know, I just think that's the way things are going.
Do you think at the moment that the government kind of is already breaching our privacy in this modern world of technology, of, you know, everything can be monitored through your mobile phone and the computer and so on?
To an extent, yes, I do. I mean, I do feel that there are some areas which need to be monitored, but I'm not too sure where you draw the line. As a member of the responsible public, I object, but I can see a need for counteracting terrorism. I can see this, but I actually don't feel that if private companies are involved, then that the necessary security checks will be there, and that worries me. Yeah.
I don't really know enough to know, but I suspect they do. Governments seem to want to know everything, and then they decide whether it's any useful. It's the old, I need to know everything so that I then know what I need to know kind of argument, but I don't buy it myself.
A risk of becoming a street state? I think it's already happened, hasn't it?
I think it's like a spying thing, yeah. And it shouldn't be allowed unless they're convinced that that person is, a major offender or something like that.
Do you think this is one step towards becoming the UK becoming a police state, or is that sort of being over dramatic?
I think we're halfway there. I mean, I really don't see that what they're doing now is anything new. It's just now that they're going to be able to do it without a court order. I think it's probably been going on for many years.
Once again, I'm sure there's many people who would feel that. I wouldn't necessarily subscribe to that, but I could understand. I think many people on issues like this look at the worst case scenario and seek to protect themselves against the worst case scenario. How valid those fears are, I guess, remains to be seen.
Do you think that we're moving sort of one step towards a police state? I mean, should we be concerned about that?
I wouldn't know about police state, but in regards to your question, I think, yes, we are moving towards a police state. Bit like Big Brother is watching you. Pardon the phrase.
I'm not sure they can do that. I thought all surveillance had to be done by warrant. All surveillance of any kind, whether it's phone tappings, observations and the like, that all has to be done with legal authority. You have to have a warrant to do that.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. If you've got something to say yourself, send an email to asimplequestion@presstv.com. That's asimplequestion@presstv.com. Meanwhile, I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.